Hey guys, it's Miss Conley. It's Tuesday, and I'm back to share chapters 3 and 4 of Freedom Crossing, and also to say hi. And I miss you guys a lot. Um, you know, with the announcement yesterday by the governor that the schools are closed for the rest of the school year, kind of made me sad because I miss you guys a lot, and I didn't really get to say goodbye. So, but things happen for a reason, and we just have to roll with it. And so, know that I will always be here for you guys, and it will just make me so much happier to see you in the fall when you come back for your next year, and come and visit me, and know that I will always be there for you guys. So, but we have to get through what we have to get through, and we do what we have to do. So, but know that you can always have your parents email me, send me a hi on Facebook, or whatever you want to do. I'm here. Hopefully I'm going to get a chance to send some things out to you guys, and keep in touch. So, but for now, we'll keep on touch on here. And so now I'm going to get ready to read chapters 3 and 4 in Freedom Crossing, and hope you're enjoying it. Okay, so we are here with chapters 3 and 4 of Freedom Crossing, and here we go. Joel exclaimed, "What's happened to you, Laura? You were never hard-hearted." "Come on, sis," said Bert. "It's only for tonight." Laura corrected him. "Tonight and all day tomorrow. You won't dare take him away until dark." Joel agreed. "We'll wait until the moon sets. That's at about 10:30 tomorrow night. The boat's supposed to pick him up just before midnight." "How are you going to get Martin to the river when you don't dare take him out the door?" demanded Laura. "That's what you said. You didn't think it was safe to even take him out the door." "Now it isn't safe. The slave hunters are everywhere, but I hope by tomorrow night they'll decide Martin has slipped through their fingers, and they'll go back to North Carolina or wherever they came from." Joel stopped his pacing to stand behind Martin's chair. He put his hands on the boy's bony shoulders. "If they're still around tomorrow night, we can make a dash for the river if we have to. But now Martin needs a warm place to sleep." Laura persisted. "You ought to send Martin straight back to his master." Joel's brows came together. Then he took a deep breath as if to control his anger. "Think a minute, Laura. How would you feel if someone owned you and made you work in the fields and beat you?" "Slaves don't feel the way we do," said Laura with conviction. They're like children. They want to be safe and cared for," she appealed to Martin. "Isn't that right?" "Some slaves feel that way, I guess," he said doubtfully. "But I don't. I want to get all the learning I can and not have any master tell me to come and go and fetch for him." Laura looked at him in disbelief. "I never heard any slave talk the way you do. I declare you must be a freedman." "No, miss, except I just set myself free." Laura was indignant. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself running away from your master. He'll be worrying about you." "Yes, miss." A smile flitted across Martin's thin face. "He's worried, all right. He's thinking to himself that $700-800 just flew right out his window, and he's going to try to catch up with it." Martin pulled himself to his feet. "Thank you for supper. I'll be going," he said, starting for the door. Joel leaped forward and seized his arm. "You're not leaving." Helpless in Joel's grip, Martin stopped. "I'm just a pack of trouble for all of you." Laura noted the proud lift of his head. He had spirit, that one. But it would be better if Joel would let him go. Might even be safer out in the woods. She pulled herself up short. She should hope that Martin would be caught and taken back to his master. He might be whipped as an example to the other slaves, but after that he would have a home and food and clothes for the rest of his life. Joel pulled Martin back into the circle of lamplight. "If you were here, we'd be in more trouble than we are. If you left here, we'd be in more trouble than we are now. You heard those dogs. They'd find you and bring the slave catchers back here in no time." "Yes, I sure can hear those dogs," said Martin, "but they don't know where to go. I walked through so many streams today, they think their noses are playing tricks on them." "They're getting nearer," Laura pointed out. "What if they come to the house anyway?" In her imagination, she could see the sheriff marching them all of them away to jail. We don't have to let anyone in the house unless they have a search warrant, said Bert. Joel nodded. And no one's going to issue a warrant before 8 o'clock this morning. 7 anyway. He relaxed his hold on Martin. Now sit down. Bert, can't we find some other hiding place besides that secret room? I guess so, Bert agreed. Let's take a look, urged Joel. Laura studied Joel's face. He was determined to hide Martin here. Nothing she could say would change his mind, and Bert would go along with him. No doubt they thought it was none of her affair. They started hiding fugitives long before she came back, and they didn't care a fig for her opinion as long as she agreed not to tell on them. Bert picked up the lamp. Let's try the cellar. Joel and Martin followed him, and Laura, left alone, was too surprised to protest at their leaving her without a light. She should return to her room, she thought, but she couldn't go back to sleep without knowing where Martin was to stay. Hastily, she followed the dim light that was retreating down the steps. The cellar looked as bleak as a dungeon. The windowless stone walls seemed to move closer as Bert lifted the lamp as high as he could under the low ceiling. Laura couldn't see a place where a person could hide. Maybe in the fireplace, Bert suggested. Joel, and Martin moved across the uneven flagstone floor, while Laura trailed slowly after them. The four stared at the black square of the fireplace opening. They always look in fireplaces, commented Joel. What about the oven? Bert pointed to a small door set in the fireplace wall 3 feet above the hearth. Laura could remember seeing her mother open that door and slide in loaves of bread to be baked. Now her stepmother seemed always to use the oven in the kitchen fireplace. Joel peered inside the bake oven. I don't know, it's small. He looked critically at Martin. But so's Martin. Might do. Here, let's see if he fits. He bent his knee so Martin could use it as a step. Martin poked his head into the opening, but no matter how he turned and twisted, his shoulders wouldn't go through the doorway. Finally, he backed out, brushing dust from his head. I've been in some mighty small holes, but this one's just too tight for me. Well, Bert said, there's still the root cellar. Laura was amazed that, in spite of the danger, Martin seemed to enjoy the search for a hiding place. He looked around the tiny root cellar with an air of satisfaction. Here were the sacks of potatoes, carrots buried in sand, and barrels of apples. Before Laura could guess what he was up to, Martin snatched up an empty potato sack and popped it over his head. When he crouched down with his knees jackknifed against his body, the sack covered him completely. He leaned against the stacked bags of potatoes. How do I look? He asked in a voice muffled by the sack. Bert turned anxiously to Joel. What do you think? Joel chuckled. If I hadn't seen him get in, I'd thought he was another bag of potatoes. Martin stood up and pulled off the bag. I'll stay here, he grinned. I won't get hungry with these apples and carrots. It's too cold down here, Joel objected. Damp, too. How about the kitchen, suggested Bert. If he hears anyone coming, he can get down here fast. I know what he can use for a bed. Thrusting the lamp into Joel's hands, Bert ran across the cellar and took the stairs to the kitchen 3 at a time. Laura started after him, and Joel called, Wait, Laura. She paused, and he caught up with her. Let's not fight with each other about this, he begged. Now, I can understand how you feel. Up to now, you've only heard the slave owner's point of view for a long time. You ought to listen to the other side of the story. Laura gave him a level gaze. I've heard nothing else tonight. Joel laughed. You're right. They climbed to the kitchen, and Martin followed them. Joel suggested thoughtfully, There's a book that might clear things up for you. Uncle Tom's Cabin. I have a copy you can borrow. Laura said scornfully, I've heard of that book. That woman who wrote it. Mrs. Stowe, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Joel said with a note of reverence. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Uncle Jim says that book's made up, all of it. Nobody treats slaves the way they're treated in that book. Sometimes they're treated worse. In silence, Laura began to clear the table. She could hear her brother's quick footsteps overhead in the small attic that was above the kitchen. He soon came downstairs carrying an old rag carpet. This used to be on the floor in Laura's room, he said. Before she came, our stepmother put down a new carpet. This is old, but it's clean. Martin took it with a smile, declaring, a bed fit for a king. He folded it and laid it on the floor behind the cook stove near the cellar entrance. Dropping onto it, he gave a weary sigh. Joel looked doubtful. It looks comfortable enough, but... With his eyes, he measured the distance from the rug bed to the cellar door. If you hear anyone at the back door, run to the cellar. He glanced at Laura. I wish... Laura knew what he wished, but she couldn't bring herself to offer up to give up her room. She had agreed to let Martin stay in the house, and that was more than she should have done. No matter what Joel and Bert said, it was wrong to break the law, and dangerous too. She looked down at Martin, already half asleep, and felt a pang of sympathy for him. He was good-humored and patient and brave. Taking a candle, she lighted it from the lamp flame and retreated with it to the door at the foot of the stairs, where she stood uncertainly with one slippered foot on top of the other. She wished she could find the words to make Joel and Bert and Martin understand how she felt. No doubt they thought she was mean not to give up her room. Finally, she said, "Well, good night." Joel and Bert echoed her good night, but Martin raised his head as he murmured, "Thank you, miss, for letting me stay." Laura said gently, "Sleep well." In her room, she set the candle on the dresser. Where was the trap door, she wondered. Full of curiosity, she could not wait until morning to see the hidden room. She lifted a corner of the carpet, rolled it back, and on hands and knees explored the bare floor. There would be a ring or a handle of some kind to raise the door, she reasoned. There would be hinges. Yet, though she examined most of the area of the room, she found no telltale signs. Perhaps it was under the heavy dresser or wardrobe where her clothes were hung. At last she smoothed back the carpet. Tomorrow in daylight she might have better success. Downstairs a door closed. Joel must be leaving. She went to the window that faced west, overlooking the side yard, and watched a tall shadow race across the lawn to the edge of the bushes. Joel's face shone white against the shrubbery. When he moved beyond her line of vision, she hurried to the front window in time to see him turn onto the ridge road toward Lewiston. Once he had been her best friend, she thought, as she knelt with her arms on the sill, but now they were miles apart, farther even than when she had been living in Virginia. Laura sighed and got to her feet. But just before she dropped the curtain into place, she saw someone move from the bushes on her left and hurry lightly down the road toward Lewiston. Someone was following Joel. The secret room. Laura ran out of her room and almost collided with Bert at the top of the stairs. Someone was hiding out by the road, she whispered. "I saw him run after Joel." "I'm not surprised," said Bert calmly. "And you didn't need to whisper. No one's in the house but Martin and the two of us." Laura shook his arm. "Don't you understand? If you take the shortcut through the woods, you might be able to catch up with Joel and warn him." Bert went to his room and sat down on the edge of the bed. "Don't worry. If someone's following Joel, he knows it. He doesn't miss a thing." Bert kicked off his slippers and stretched out on his back. Laura looked down at her brother, amazed at his indifference. "You're a mighty poor friend, Bert Eastman. Joel may be fighting for his life this very instant." "I'd be a worse friend if I followed him." Bert raised on one elbow and scowled at Laura. "If those slave hunters saw me coming through the woods after Joel, they'd know we were up to something. Next thing, they'd come back here and tear this house apart until they found Martin." "You care more about that darky than you do about Joel. I declare you must be touched in the head." In the dim light, Bert's face was an unfamiliar mask with shadows where his eyes should be. "I forgot what it was like to have a big sister bossing me around," he remarked. "Can't say I enjoy it." He turned onto his side with his back to her. Laura drew in a quick breath. It didn't seem possible that this was her young brother talking so impudently. "You won't have me bossing you around much longer." To her annoyance, she heard her voice quaver. "Just as soon as I can. I'm going back to where I'm wanted. Uncle Jim and Aunt Ruth begged me to stay." She whirled around and walked swiftly to her room, closing her door firmly behind her. Tears of hurt and anger filled her eyes, but she rubbed them away with her arm. She refused to cry over Bert or Joel Todd either. Laura awakened to the sound of tapping. Tapping again. In a half-daze, she thought, "Oh, not another runaway." Then her senses cleared. She realized the tapping was on her own door. She sat up, pulling the bedclothes up to her chin. The door inched open, and Bert poked his head through the opening. "Good morning," he said, coming into the middle of the room. For a moment he was silent, shifting from one foot to another. Then he said awkwardly, "I'm sorry I snapped at you last night about being bossy." Laura leaned back against the headboard of the bed and replied stiffly, "That's all right." She glanced up at him, noticing with surprise how the sunlight shone on the light fuzz on his upper lip. Her little brother was gone forever. It wouldn't be long before he would be shaving, though he was only 13. Already he was broader in the shoulders and taller than she was. Suddenly, seeing him standing there, she was reminded of a time long ago when, having misbehaved at the supper table, she had been sent to her room with her meal only half finished. Bert had come up that night bringing a smuggled cookie and sprawled companionably on the floor beside the rocking chair where she sat in lonely misery. "We had applesauce too," he said, "but I couldn't save any of that for you. I couldn't put that in my pocket." With her mouth full of cookies, she asked, "Is this yours?" "Yes." She held out what remained. "Here, you didn't have to do that." He shook his head. "You eat it." That's the way it had been between them. She once heard her father comment, "Bert and Laura may quarrel, but as soon as one of them's in trouble, they come together thick as thieves." Now that closeness was gone. Bert was a little more than a tall stranger. Indeed, it scarcely seemed right that he should be in her bedroom. A fragrant scent wafted through her open door. "I smell sausage," she exclaimed. "Have you had breakfast?" Bert grinned. "Not yet. We have a cook this morning. Martin used to be a kitchen boy." Laura reached for her robe at the foot of the bed. "I'll dress and be down shortly." Bert started for the door and then stopped abruptly. I see you've been looking for the trap door," he remarked. "Did you find it?" Laura followed his gaze to the wrinkled carpet. "No, I didn't." Bert knelt and rolled back the carpet. He pointed to a section of the bare floor between the bed and the doorway. "There it is." Laura joined him, buttoning her robe. "I looked there and I couldn't find it. Of course, I only had a candle for light." She studied the floorboards. "I still don't see any trap door." Crouching, Bert slid his fingers into a small crack. To Laura's amazement, he lifted out an oblong section of the floor, revealing an opening large enough to admit a man's body. "Well, for pity's sake," she said. "Clever, isn't it?" Bert looked pleased at her surprise. "We didn't want a ring or handle that would show. Hinges would be a giveaway, too. So we got this idea. This section rests on a frame that holds it up. And nobody notices this little room from downstairs because the hall closet is under it. We just lowered the ceiling in the closet." Laura peered into the hole at the coffin-like chamber below. It was only 3 or 4 feet deep. A person couldn't stand in it, and it was wide enough for only 1 or 2 people. "How long do they hide in there?" she asked. "All day, sometimes longer." "I think they'd suffocate." "We drilled holes along the sides, see?" She shuddered. "It must be dark as night when you put the cover on. I'd hate to stay in there. A person couldn't even read to pass the time away. Of course," she added, "your fugitives can't read, anyway." "Usually they can't, but Martin can." "Nonsense. Did he tell you that?" "Yes," said Bert, "and besides, he read to me from a newspaper." He replaced the trap door. "Hurry up. Martin must be starved. He's been up for over an hour. He got the fire going and took a bath before I even went down." "He doesn't have to wait for me," Laura said, with the return of yesterday's annoyance. She realized, too, that her head was aching. No wonder, with the little bit of sleep that she'd had the night before. "He won't eat before we do," answered Bert. "If you'd get out, I could dress," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. Martin looked like a different boy this morning, Laura found. Clean and wearing a pair of Bert's outgrown pants and one of his old shirts, he was presiding at the cook stove. 3 pancakes were browning on the griddle, and on Laura's arrival, he removed the crisp sausages from a pan at the rear of the stove and placed them on a platter. "Good morning, Miss Laura," he greeted her, ducking his head shyly. "Breakfast's ready." "Come on, you sit down with us," Martin urged Bert. Martin shook his head. "I'll eat by the stove where I can turn the griddle cakes," he answered. Laura knew that he was not accustomed to sitting down with white people. She had been surprised when he had consented to sit at the table with her, Joel, and Bert the night before. Uncle Jim's slaves always ate by themselves. Probably last night he had been too tired and hungry to object. "It's awfully dark in here," she remarked. "Why don't you open the curtains?" A lighted lamp glowed in the middle of the table and made a small area of light in the dimness. She briskly pulled back the curtains, letting in a flood of sunlight. "There, that's better." Silence was her only answer when she became aware that the 2 boys were looking at each other and that Martin had backed against the wall behind the stove. "Oh," she said, "you're afraid someone will look in the window and see Martin." "That's right," Bert agreed. "But a covered window in the daytime really looks suspicious," she pointed out. Bert nodded to Martin. "She's right." He turned down the lamp and, leaning over, blew it out. Slowly Martin returned to the stove, but Laura noticed he kept his eyes warily on the window. eating the delicious pancakes and sausage with Martin hovering nearby, ready for a fresh serving, made Laura feel as if she were back in Virginia and Aunt Ruth's. She relaxed and almost forgot the danger that hung over all of them. With the spoon, she caught a trickle of maple syrup that was running from the spout of the pewter pitcher. Absently, she licked the spoon, savoring the sweetness. Maple syrup was so much tastier than molasses, she thought. How long had it been since she had helped pot the sugaring off? That was always such fun, stirring the sap in the big kettles, early in the spring when the snow was still on the ground. But she wouldn't be here for that. Long before spring, she'd be back in Virginia. "Martin," she said, "I hear you know how to read." "Yes, miss. My pappy taught me. I can write, too, but spelling gives me some—" Laura looked up, wondering why Martin didn't finish what he was saying. She saw that his eyes, wide with terror, were fixed on the window. Instantly, Laura guessed what had happened. He had seen someone outside. No one was in sight now, but a sharp knock sounded on the back door. Okay, so that's chapters 3 and 4. Tomorrow we'll read 2 more, and hope you're enjoying the book Freedom Crossing by Margaret Gough Clark. Okay, see you tomorrow.